さて、それではお時間となりましたので、これよりブロックチェーンインターオペラビリティの道しるべ、未来のクロスロードをテーマにパネルディスカッションを行ってまいります。はじめにパネリストの皆様をご紹介いたします。イーサリアム財団研究者ダニー・ライアン様、そしてエニードット CEO パトリック・マッコリー様、続いてインスティテュット・マインズ・テレコムサドパリス教授ホアキン・ガルシア・アルファロ様、最後にモデレーターを務めていただきますのはカリスティック CEO ISOTC307 セキュリティ・プライバシー・アイデンティティ・ワーキング・グループ座長ジュリアン・ブリンガー様です。それではここからはジュリアン様にお任せしたいと思います。So Julian, please start.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the panel session on blockchain interoperability. I'm happy to have Danny, Patrick, and Joaquin with us today, joining late night or early morning from all over the world. So Danny Ryan is a co-researcher at Ethereum Foundation, currently involved in one of the most famous projects in Ethereum, Ethereum 2.0, and the a well-known upgrade to unexpected upgrade to come. He's also one of the initial contributors of an initiative called Blockchain Governance Initiative Network, announced last March at the original dates where the BG2C conference was planned in March. Danny, do you want to add anything?
I mean, that pretty much got it. I do research at the Ethereum Foundation and work on ETH2O. I actually spent a lot of time working on building a single protocol, but I believe that when you spend a lot of time working on protocols, you often think about how to simplify how they might communicate with others, and how sometimes when you're working on how you might build light client proofs and protocols for your own protocol, that has implications for how other protocols might be built and how other protocols might interact with it. So that's my context.
Thanks, Danny. Patrick McCrory is the CEO of Anidot, a project that facilitates transaction as a service for Ethereum. But he has also deep experience on research in cryptocurrencies, cryptography, and smart contracts. He has got a PhD on this, and in particular with a strong experience on doing research in Bitcoin, being assistant professor or researcher in various universities, either in UK, London, or in the US. Patrick, you want to add anything else?
I can just add a little bit, I guess. So for the past couple of years, my research interest has been on off-chain protocols. So the idea is that, how can you scale these networks without setting all the transactions to the network? And a lot of that is going to end up, the way it's starting to look like now is you're going to have all these different off-chain protocols, and the question is, how do they all communicate with each other? And it's very likely we'll use the same techniques from layer 1 to do that on layer 2. So I think that's how this is relevant to the panel. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. Joaquin Garcia Alfaro, who is a full professor in France at Télécom Sud Paris Institut Polytechnique de Paris in Paris. He has been a researcher, adjunct research professor, and in various universities since now quite some years, and he's a researcher in IT security and privacy. With works related in particular to management of security policies, analysis of vulnerabilities, and also wireless security. And he's also an initial contributor of the Begin initiative. And I guess he's also part of the BSAFE network, which is a research network for blockchain technology between various university and research groups. Joaquin, do you want to add something else?
Yes, so hi everyone, thank you very much for the introduction, and just trying to reach out to the community. So like Julian says, I basically conduct research on cybersecurity, access control, attack detection, data privacy management. And since some years ago, I got into the blockchain realm, basically motivated by second layer protocols, standardization of blockchain technologies. So my interest is basically in terms of interoperability, what happens if things get wrong, and maybe which would be the impact of wrong implementation of interoperability connectors and interoperability protocols. So glad to be in the panel, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Joaquin. So now, interoperability. In very short definition, it's often defined as the ability for two or more systems or components to exchange information or to use the information that has been exchanged. So now, why are we discussing blockchain interoperability? Just to give a bit of context. So, as you know, Bitcoin is there since now many years. Known since 2008. Ethereum, to name a second other quite important example, is there since 2015. We have similar consensus mechanisms based on proof of work, at least for the moment, while waiting for Ethereum 2.0. We'll certainly speak about that. But since then, we have seen many different networks, many different forks, with different structure of blocks, different chaining techniques, and even different consensus mechanisms, proof of stakes, delegated proof of stakes, elapsed time, proof of authority, proof of weight, Byzantine fault tolerance, etc. And to name only a few, things like Tezos, EOS, Cardano, Algorand, and there are many more networks. And even when we think about the different kind of networks, we have public blockchain, we have private blockchain, consortium-based blockchain, permission, also called permission blockchain. And more generally, we have now distributed ledger technologies, not only blockchain. Hyperledger projects are among probably the most well-known, starting with Hyperledger Fabrics, now well established. And yeah, there are still many initiatives going to develop future networks with scalability and security in mind, with various techniques, various consensus mechanisms. But overall, this definitely raises the question of interoperability. If we look at just the cryptocurrencies, not the networks, but just the coins, on the famous website CoinMarketCap, there are more than 6,000 coins listed. If we compare this to the number of currently used fiat currencies, it's definitely much more. It's another order of magnitude. So it's when we think about interoperability, even at the coin level, swapping, converting between different cryptocurrencies already rely to either to use a trusted party or to rely on some decentralized swapping methods. But interoperability is definitely, I guess, more than that, and I will be very happy to discuss about all those things today. It's about interoperability between chains, between transaction systems, like how one can recognize trust information coming from Ethereum when you are in another network, for instance. It's also about the application that are relying on the transaction on the network. It's also in particular true when you have virtual execution environment provided by some of the networks to run distributed application on the network. But probably we can think also about interoperability between some of the properties, like what is given from one consensus rules and governance on some network compared to the other. And finally, of course, we don't have to forget the interoperability with existing legacy systems, which are not based on blockchain, but still it's very important to be able to interact between blockchain and other systems. Just to before going to the questions to the panelists, there are already today some initiatives trying to improve interoperability, various projects trying to deal with cross-chain transaction or trying to establish networks of blockchains. Also some initiatives to standardize the architecture, standardize different layers within architecture of a blockchain network, blockchain protocols, and addressing different various aspects of interoperability. Two examples. I'm part of the ISO technical committees 307 on blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, working on future standards related to architecture, governance aspects, but mostly on the technical angle, because the goal is to establish technical standards with global interoperability of all those systems and in the industrial level in particular as a motivation. And I mentioned Begin very quickly at the beginning when introducing Danny and Joaquin, so the Blockchain Governance Initiative Network. with a focus which is more related to overall organizational governance. So this is part of the outgoing works on interoperability, and we are going probably to learn much more today with this session. And to summarize, this is still a very complicated, at least before this session, from my point of view, a multi-layers challenge. And the goal of the panel is to highlight the main issues and trends towards more interoperability. So maybe start, Danny, do you see, on your point of view, do you think that interoperability is more than what I just mentioned? And do you see other stakeholders that should be involved in this field?
I mean, interoperability, I think you hit it from many angles of the stack. And honestly, before I came to this, I was thinking of just interoperability of blockchains, two networks trying to speak to each other. But even, say, in the context of just Ethereum, there's tons of work done on just interoperability amongst applications within Ethereum. If you look at any of the ERC standards, some of the earliest, like, blockchain interoperability stuff was actually, how can applications from the same blockchain speak to each other? And that obviously, once you start looking at different layers and you start looking at different blockchains, and once you even get out of the blockchain space and blockchains trying to communicate with other things, that the complexities there compound. And so if we have, if there's going to be any sanity into this process, I think standards are probably the only approach that'll get us there. Something that I often I think it's worth noting is when you talk about interoperability between two blockchains, you're really talking about one blockchain understanding in some capacity the consensus of the other blockchain. How can blockchain A understand anything about the state of blockchain B? And that's often verifying succinct proofs about the other proof, whether it be headers for proof of work, or whether it be some sort of light client proofs and proof of stake protocols. And so one of the reasons we build other blockchains and new blockchains is often to experiment with consensus protocols. And so even by definition, the reason, like all these chains speaking to each other, it becomes hard because we're all speaking different protocols. And so even figuring out how to standardize proofs about protocols and standardize digests about protocols, often in the form of Merkle roots and things, opens it up, but there's a lot of complexity underneath the hood to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. And that's very interesting that you mentioned the fact that even when considering Ethereum by itself, it's already a challenge, and there are many facets. Maybe Patrick, you can comment on the fact that whether this should be seen differently from the already established chain like Bitcoin and Ethereum versus the newcomers, and in some way whether the problem is addressed differently and whether it should be addressed differently at the end.
Yeah, I can give some comments there. I guess the way I normally look at these protocols is that you have two blockchains and you want, a transaction to execute on each blockchain at the same time. And there's three different ways this can typically be achieved. So the first one is custodial, or there's trusted hardware in the middle. So that's like your wrapped Bitcoin, for example. You lock up Bitcoin into multi-sig of Bitcoin with some trusted custodians. Then the trusted hardware will mint you Ethereum on ETH. The reason for that is Bitcoin was never designed with this in mind. Satoshi Nakamoto had no idea that there'd be multi-chains. He was a supporter of multi-chains later on in 2011 onwards, before he disappeared, but he never thought you'd ever have to connect to another blockchain. So Bitcoin never had any of this, in mind to support that. So the first category is custodial, and that's the best way that could be achieved so far. The other way, for Bitcoin anyway, the other one is that the parties in the transaction takes on the local risk. So there's Alice and Bob. Alice wants to get Bitcoin, Bob wants to get Ether, and that's like an atomic swap where they both set up their transactions in such a way where they can do this transaction, or where they can do this swap. So that's atomic swaps, and that's like the Lightning Network as well. Atomic swaps like TransferWise, where you're swapping two assets. Lightning is, a routed payment across multiple parties where the coin's going in one direction. What's important there is that it's trust minimized in the sense that both parties take on the risk because they're trusting their local blockchain for that. And then the third one is really what Danny was talking about, and this is sort of, what the new blockchains are capable of, is, what if you could have blockchain A, blockchain A can know about blockchain B, and blockchain B can know about blockchain A. So they know some information about the other blockchain. So it's a bit like BTC Relay on Ethereum, where Ethereum has enough information about Bitcoin where it can verify information about Bitcoin. So it can say, oh, I know that transaction was confirmed because you proved that to me because I have enough information to check that. The original sidechain paper by Blockstream back in 2014 alluded to that. It was between two Bitcoin blockchains, but again, Bitcoin couldn't support that, so they went with a custodian solution with this crazy federation. But I think that third one, blockchain A knowing about blockchain B and blockchain B knowing about blockchain A, that's basically, I guess, the future of ETH 2.0, for example, between all the different shards. Danny can talk more about that. And also what all these new blockchains will probably be capable of. Ethereum's not actually very good for doing that either in terms of other blockchains knowing about Ethereum because of their proof of work algorithm. It's massive and blows up the other blockchains. But that can be improved because Ethereum's willing to change, which is quite nice. So that's maybe a long-winded answer to this.
Thanks, Patrick. And I guess maybe the question can be asked again after Ethereum 2.0 will be out, whether our proof of work of Ethereum move to proof of stake has changed something in the interoperability process. What do you think, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, one of the design goals in the Ethereum 2.0 roadmap, which is kind of like a major upgrade of the core consensus of Ethereum, is light client verifiability, which in proof of stake protocols, often you get a larger design landscape to ensure that that's the case, where through random sampling or through verifying fewer blocks than all of them necessarily, you can verify some subset of signatures, validator signatures, and advance the protocol in a lighter way. And so another chain looking at Ethereum 2.0 or other proof of stake chains often can do a handful of signature verifications and get an updated state root, updated digest about the blockchain. So that's definitely a goal there. Something that's worth pointing out is when you have two blockchains that are attempting to communicate with each other, I think the best that you can do is that you're just relying on the security of the other blockchain, right? And any of these other methods, like that's the absolute best. It's probably like full verification of the other chain, and then light clients, often there's some sort of degradation and security profile that you're looking at to get that. But often you can reason about these things and make good decisions about the security trade-off there. And then some of the other methods that Patrick was alluding to often take on additional counterparty risk. And so the optimal is certainly this like kind of light client verification of other chains on chain, which with sufficient programmability, you can generally get there. It's kind of a bummer Bitcoin can't know about other chains, but people then work on cryptoeconomic and custodial solutions instead.
Thanks, Danny. Do you think, Joaquin, on your side, that the problem are different with respect to the different layers of interoperability that we try to address? I mean, for instance, trying to address information exchange or relying, as for instance, Danny said, relying on the security of other chain, like relying on the consensus mechanism and the properties, and at the end, probably what you consider as the, let's say, the compromise between interoperability issues and the security impact it may have when we consider different blockchains like this.
Yeah, that's a very, very, very nice question, a very tricky one. So, I mean, the way how I see it, blockchains are basically, simplifying a programmable environment. So distributed programmable environments where interoperability we have seen in the past is something that we need to address. And what happened with wrong interoperability solution happens, and we can move not just to privacy violations, security weaknesses. What about the resilience properties of blockchains? Can we affect cascading effects if something goes wrong? Can we imagine situations in public blockchains where security beyond the 51% attack happens, etc. So this was basically my initial impression when I started working on this. And basically, I was doing this as a kind of interministerial mission in order to understand and to write about technological barriers of blockchains, academically speaking and industrially speaking. So our interest at the very beginning was basically standards. Standards here is a must. As soon as we talk about interoperability, looking at the standards, not from ISO, IEEE, etc., but here in Europe, the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum of the European Commission looking for activities based on blockchain, forum for sharing information, recommendations, and this kind of stuff. This was, like I said, my initial impression, but let's say my second and more optimistic impression is that research on blockchain interoperability now is kind of mature. Looking back in 2016, 2017, it's true that things were a little bit fragmented from academia and industry. But nowadays, if we look at the amount of papers, peer-review papers, and also white and green papers about most approaches that started in 2017, we see that beyond the cryptocurrency literature, where initially we were all time looking at smart contracts, tokens, hash time lock contracts, etc. Now we have things that are very promising, like blockchain connectors, blockchain engines, and I think at this point, most of the conceptual ideas are moving to the field of development, and we can start producing solid results. So Patrick and Danny, they were just mentioning some of them, but I think we can be optimistic, and I think most of the material is there, and we can start really doing things that are solid.
Thanks, Joaquin. Danny, based on your experience, in particular on the project Ethereum 2.0, at the end, do you think it is only about technical issues for interoperability between blockchains, interoperability for the transaction layers, for the consensus properties, etc., or it's more than technical? There are some non-technical aspects on that.
I think it's clearly technical and non-technical issues here. I mean, the technical becomes, can you do it? How do you do it? And what is the security trade-off that you're taking in making these things? And then, I mean, on the non-technical side, as we discussed, I mean, getting people to adopt standards is non-technical. Writing the standards is technical, but actually coalescing, I mean, blockchain communities are often very fragmented from community to community. Often, like, people have some sort of ideology, have some sort of reason that they're building on a blockchain, and there isn't always the cross-pollination that you need to, like, get standards adopted. And maybe something like VGN can help facilitate that. But there's other interesting questions here, in like in a world in which we have multiple blockchains, which we clearly do. You know, do we need to facilitate very ad hoc communication protocols between a handful of them, because those have become the ones that are very important? Or do we need to have a more robust, like, sophisticated solution that handles generically communication amongst all blockchain? And I don't necessarily know the answer, but being able to define some of these questions and able to answer these questions a priori would allow you to figure out which solutions you need to actually solve. I think we're not terribly early in blockchain interoperability, but just, I think, very recently are you going to start seeing some of these theoretical things go out into and be used and experimented with. So there's a lot of good information to draw on in the next couple of years there.
Thanks, Danny. Maybe Patrick, you want to add something to that?
Add something.
Technical.
Yeah, so I mean, there's obviously very technical problems. That's why people have been doing research on this for such a long time. Actually, what to make was to do with why was the research fragmented, let's say 2014, 2015. And I think one of the reasons why the research was catching up was because they were trying to do research in Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is very complicated under the hood. It's like a Frankenstein system. So a lot of the time when you want to build a protocol, you ended up just fighting Bitcoin to get it to work as opposed to doing your research. And so a lot of people started working on Ethereum after that point, where you just worry about the protocol and not necessarily implementation details. So I think that helped a lot of the research. In terms of the technical versus non-technical, I think the biggest issue so far has always been interest in terms of practical usage. Why do we need to do this for? So one good example is Bitcoin Relay was implemented on Ethereum in 2016. And BTC Relay was a mechanism to allow you to verify information about Bitcoin on Ethereum. But BTC Relay never really got that popular. It was like the first example of doing this, and no one really used it, which is a shame. But now you have similar solutions like WBTC, and I just Googled it here to see how much is locked up. And there's currently over $300 million worth of Bitcoin locked up on Ethereum. Again, I think that's using trusted hardware, I think, or some crypto economic protocol. I don't know exactly how WBTC works. But now there's motivation for people to take their Bitcoin, lock it up in Bitcoin, and give it over to Ethereum. In this case, because they want to do yield farming, and yield farming is a different topic altogether. They want to earn money on their Bitcoin. They want to manage their crops, but now there's some demand for this. People actually want to use their Bitcoin on a different blockchain, and I think this is going to continue going forward. The next big challenge in my mind is the layer 2 systems and rollups. Ethereum is way too expensive to do anything now unless you're a high net worth individual and you're trading $50,000 or more, let's say. So people want to take these systems, the dApps, put them on a rollup on a Plasma off-chain protocol. But now you have all these different systems that need to talk to each other. And that's going to be one of the biggest challenges people need to solve next for that to really work. So I think my point there is more demand. People start solving these problems when there's a need for it. And they may look a bit Frankenstein to begin with.
And based on the fact that you mentioned, Danny, and also Patrick, the fact that people are starting to realize that there is something to be done. People are starting to work on those things. Maturity, you also mentioned, Joaquin, it's not the same as 2016. Do you have, for instance, Joaquin, any specific successful example of project working on some blockchain or working on the topic of interoperability between blockchains that for which it seems that they are doing the things right and helping to improve interoperability on their system, or for the application relying on their system or between different systems?
So in terms of sample applications, and again, remember, I'm from academia, not from industry, so sometimes we talk about science fiction for things here, but the way how I see it and how interoperability in some important applications I saw and I thought that was going to be very important. We have as a kind of examples, I was thinking about IPFS. So when we talk about common storage using blockchain, providing a peer-to-peer network in order to store, deliver, etc. Here, clearly, interoperability is a must. And if we can see that these are sample applications where things are successful, mature enough, we go back to the questions I was putting before about security, privacy, resilience, etc. So this will be an awesome application to show that things are mature enough moving from 2016 to 2020. Other sample applications I have in mind and we have been using when we monitor kind of potential applications and successful stories that we would like to explain. I don't know if this is really successful, but I would like to think as successful stories. We think about Astria, for example, about voting general purpose decentralized Oracle in order to use the traditional research in terms of e-voting based on blockchain. And I guess there will be many, many others. So just going to the traditional questions in academia that we want to answer in terms of research is the current state of blockchain interoperability solution mature enough? My impression, as I said before, is that yes, I think it starts being so. We see projects and we see discussions now that show this. Going back to the question about technological requirements, are set of technological requirements satisfied? Maybe not yet, but we start having things in order to say that the critical requirements probably are starting to be satisfied, and production of standards is moving to the good direction. We are removing barriers in order to have this kind of successful applications I was mentioning now. And what's the real, let's say, conclusion of this kind of things is that clearly we need to address maybe as open problems the traditional things of blockchains when we talk about, for example, scalability. So can we justify interoperability? Yes, I start thinking that it's possible, but can we do it in an scalable manner? Can we handle this kind of issues in terms of cybersecurity, interoperability, and scalability? I think we are still not there, but this kind of applications can show, if we manage to do it, that we are going to the good direction.
Thanks, Joaquin. Patrick, on your side, do you see any breakthrough project coming or successfully addressing the interoperability issues and really going a step forward compared to the current status?
I mostly follow Ethereum, and Ethereum seems to be in my mind, trying to solve those problems. I hear Polkadot and Cosmos are going down that route as well. They're more focused on a multi-blockchain world from the beginning, but I don't have a strong opinion on there. I don't really know what they're doing under the hood. I haven't followed it, so I can just comment that I know Ethereum's doing a good job on that. That may be my bias coming out.
Hey guys, sorry, I had to restart. My audio was going crazy. I couldn't hear y'all. Going back.
No worries.
But yeah, but I missed the last prompt. What you mind?
So we were discussing about some breakthrough projects, and Patrick mentioned Ethereum as one of the nice example, and also mentioned a few other projects. And I guess what you said, Patrick, the fact that you don't really know what's happening on some of the other projects shows also that there are many projects out there, and it's difficult also to know exactly the maturity of all the projects. If you are not really deep into the community, it's not always good. And at the end, it shows also that it's still kind of fragmented. So what in your opinion, Danny, should be done to incentivize the different communities to work together on this interoperability topic?
Good question. To incentivize, I mean, for one, smaller blockchains that are kind of up and coming that want to get a market share, want to become relevant. I mean, one of the strategies is to be interoperable with some of the more larger blockchains. So like if you had a new blockchain and you could have a relatively trustless solution to interoperate with Bitcoin, then all of a sudden you have like a value proposition there. And so, I mean, the incentives to interoperate are often from smaller networks attempting to capture some of the market share or just become part of the larger network effects of the blockchains. So I think that's also why you've seen in some of the newer blockchains a very large focus. I mean, I've seen a couple of Ethereum killers that like one of like right out the gate, they have a trustless bridge or they have a bridge with some amount of trade-offs. And so they say like, come here, come facilitate, come work over here. So I think there is certainly incentives exist to make sure things can be interoperable. I mean, why are people working on a Bitcoin or Ethereum relay for years and years? I think it's because they want people on Ethereum want to capture some of the network effects and kind of like bridge these communities. For a more generic solution, I don't know. I don't know what incentives need to be put in place, and I don't know exactly who would be listened to drive such a standard. I think that some of these more up-and-coming blockchains that are posing themselves for interoperability, I think, for example, Cosmos has the IBC protocol. They've been working on an internet blockchain protocol to facilitate communication out the gate, because I think that's kind of their bread and butter. It's what they're trying to be good for. And so maybe one of these projects that positions themselves for interoperability, they can see some amount of adoption, then we might start seeing network effects and coalescence on certain standards. But right now, I think there's going to be a lot of ad hoc experiments, and we might get some good standards out of it.
right now, I mean, if you're in the Ethereum network, like the standards that you look at are in the ERCs, the EIPs, but maybe that becomes a more meta place of truth for blockchain standards sooner rather than later. We'll see.
Thanks, Danny. Joaquin, do you think that, let's say, other approaches like driven by not only by technical community, but driven also by organization, or at least with the motivation of kind of organizational improvement in terms of governance, like Begin, for instance, can help to improve interoperability between the
Yes,
different
I
blockchains?
think. Yeah, I think this is a very. I mean, at least we hope that's why we are part of these initiatives, and this is part of the goals that we have in mind, and the way of opening to everybody. Everybody can just join to the mailing list to follow the GitHub repository, etc. And I think it's kind of important if we see the evolution that how things are moving, like I said before. I mean, moving from initially just solutions for cryptocurrencies, basically on smart contracts and hash and block contracts, etc., to the projects that Patrick was mentioning, Cosmos, Polkadot, more or less as kind of engines, blockchain engines that allowed, by definition in the engine itself, interoperability, and the evolution going towards connectors, basically relays that have kind of agnostic protocols in order to build this idea of blockchain of chains, blockchain of migrators. These are kind of discussions and the kind of initiatives that we are having in mind in initiatives like Begin. So that's true that the community is kind of fragmented, and like I said before, I think clearly in order to tackle the open issues and the challenge, fragmentation is an issue. Just thinking, for example, in the kind of surveys I was mentioning before. So we were talking about almost 350 papers between peer review papers and peer literature. Is a lot of things in order to move from theory to practice. Most of the work probably is conceptual, and we need to move to put in practice some of these concepts in order to serve for our specific applications. My point and the kind of things that I'm more interested is how to handle the scalability issue, respecting still security, privacy, and resilience properties. I think it's very challenging to enforce correct execution in a trust-free manner in order to have no trust authority and to coordinate the executions on different blockchains in a scalable manner and fulfilling these properties. But yes, that's some of the things that standards and governance bodies we try to discuss and try to move forward.
Thanks, Joaquin. Patrick, in a few words on your side, what do you think are the next steps to work further to improve interoperability between the different systems and in some way to facilitate the use of different blockchains?
I guess the next steps is going to be applications that require this. So obviously a lot of the DeFi apps, they're all complaining that they're too expensive. So the DeFi apps need to go somewhere. So either they'll go to a different blockchain or they'll end up on a roll-up system, like an optimistic roll-up. And I guess from my perspective, that's probably where you want to see the next live instance of this in the short term. The way I sort of foresee it happening, and I've spoken about this a few times, and I noticed Connect started implementing it, which is really nice, is if you have two different roll-up blocks or roll-up, blockchains, let's say, you have Uniswap here, maybe you have Balancer here, and there's somebody who wants to get an arbitrage moment between the two exchanges. They're exchanges for all purposes. They don't need to worry about how they work. What I foresee happening is you have intermediaries like payment channels, like the Lightning Network. You'll have a party on Uniswap. They'll initiate a trade. It'll fly across the network, the Lightning Network, straight into the balancer, set up another trade, maybe go the whole way back. Then they'll all execute atomically using atomic swaps. I think, in my mind, that's might be the thing we'll see soon. Connects have already implemented parts of that for the great Redis scalability competition. The optimistic rollups aren't ready yet, but they should be ready in a few months. The ZK rollups are ready, but they only do token transfers. I sort of see that happening, but maybe that's still a bit blue sky. That would be my answer to that anyway.
Thanks, Patrick. We'll see. We'll see in the upcoming months. Danny, a very short and concluding remark on your side.
Thanks for having me. I mean, in E2, I think we're dealing with the problem of intra-chain communications within the same protocol, and there will be likely in the ERC forum, because it's all Ethereum, standards on how these proofs and things are consumed across chains. But many of the problems that we're solving there are also going to be solved in many places. So hopefully we can collaborate and not reinvent the wheel 8 times.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Danny, Joaquin, Patrick, the three of you for the participation today. So that's the end of the panel. I hope you learn a lot while watching the panel, and we definitely still need to work on it. But that's a good thing to see that situation has improved in the previous couple of years, and well, we'll see a lot coming in the upcoming months here on this. Thank you very much, Konnichiwa, and this is the end of the panel.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for the wonderful discussion. Thank you, Julian, for moderation. Thank you very much.
ありがとう。
さて、以上をもちまして、ブロックチェーンインターオペラビリティの道しるべ、未来のクロスロードパネルディスカッション終了となります。